So how do you actually start the downswing? That's what we're covering today. We're going to break this down into 3 main areas which are really key. What the greats do, traits of the greats. And then we're going to finish up with doing something just through impact, just to help you transition it through to the end of your golf swing. So when we're looking at starting the downswing, the first thing we have to really understand is when the downswing starts. Now, the body begins to move back towards the target, so in this direction, before the club head has finished moving away from the target. It's really important. It's what we say with all the great players. So as the club head is still moving away from the target, so making its backswing move, the lower body begins to move towards the target. So the first little exercise is really enabling you to feel and sense when that happens. So we're going to take an address. I've got myself a mid-iron here, and we're just going to move the lead foot so it's against the trail foot. And what I'd love you to do is just hover the club. It doesn't have to be resting on the ground. You're going to make your backswing move, and then when your lead arm reaches around about level with the ground, you're going to start and step into your, class that as a normal stance position. So we make a move back, and then we step across. And then eventually that movement, that stepping across, which initiates the downswing movement with the lower body, will stop the club and the arm moving away from the target and eventually pull them into the downswing. So let me show you what that would look like. I'm going to go back, and then we step and we go through. Now at this stage, there's no speed here. There doesn't need to be speed. This exercise is really just to enable you to sort of feel and sense what it's like to have this good timing and have the downswing starting with the lower body before the backswing technically finishes. As a golf coach, I wouldn't really want you to think about a backswing and a downswing. There's a movement away from the ball, there's a transition, which is what we're talking about here, and then there's a downswing move. The transition is really important. So we go back, we step, and we go through. Now once you've done a couple of those and you've got that sensation, that feel, tee your ball up as I've done here and do the exact same thing. So I'm going to take my normal address, foot touches, start with the club behind the ball, and just go ahead and make that move at relatively slow speed. Now that ball may well only have gone 100 yards through the air, but the rhythm was great, the timing was great, the strike was great, and that's because my sequencing was correct. My lower body initiated that move. So when we're talking about how do we start the downswing, the first thing we have to establish is when it starts, and it should start before the club has finished its backswing. So for the second point, we're looking a little bit more detail at what the hips actually do and the movement that they should have. We've obviously just covered when they start, but what should they actually do? Now this little exercise is going to give you an exaggerated feel. So we're going to sort of push it sort of past what should happen, but it's great to give you that sensation. So often, the fault that I see is that once a golfer gets to the top of the backswing, they'll often make this rotational move without a huge amount of lateral shift. We know that the lower body should be moving towards the target. There's some lateral movement. This is a great little exercise to help you feel that, and you're going to just need a golf club. You should all have one of those pretty handy. Take that golf club, place it across your hips, and take your normal address to that golf ball. Now I want you to be opening the palms so they're against the grip and the club shaft, and you're very simply going to make what you feel is a little backswing rotation where the hips turn and the shoulders turn. And you can see that that's reflected in what the golf club does. Now, what I wouldn't want you to do is begin the downswing move with a rotation of the hips back to where they came from. And you can see that the golf club is obviously reflecting that. From that face on, you'll see that that doesn't look like a particularly good position. It's not really where we see the best players. So this little exercise is this. You're going to make a backswing move, and you're going to maintain the angle that that golf club is on. So it's rotated, and I'm going to keep that angle. And as I keep that angle, I'm going to take both hands and I'm going to push the golf club towards the target. And you can see how when I'm doing that, my hip is moving towards the target, my lower body is moving towards the target, but there's very, very little rotation. Once I feel like my weight and my pressure is into my lead side, and I sort of feel like if I went any further I'd compromise my balance, I'm then going to take that golf club and I'm going to rotate it through. Now, in this little exercise, I almost want you to feel like there's 3 movements. Not necessarily going to be doing that when we're actually got the golf club, but those 3 movements are a rotation, a shift, and a rotation. This drill, this exercise, this concept is going to be brilliant for any of you who feel like you get stuck on the back leg, any of you who feel like you come over the top, or anyone who's really just trying to move their club path to a little bit more of an in to out sort of pattern. This is brilliant for that because it gives you time, as you're making that movement with the hips, it gives you time to let the club drop into a much, much better delivery position. If we don't have that lateral move, from the top we get this rotational move. That tends to force the hands on the club outwards, and then from there it's clearly going to be working across and not the best delivery. So this little exercise is great. We go back, we push, and we rotate. Notice how the weight or the pressure is getting into my lead side before I really add in that rotation. Now, initially, I'd have you hit balls doing that with a pause. So you take your address, we're going to visualize that club across the hips, we rotate it back, we push them forwards, notice how the arms drop, and then we swing through. And again, notice that ball, 50, 60 yards, low speed, low distance really helps you when you're starting to learn new moves. You're starting to piece them together and understand how they move together. So that little exercise there, brilliant to get the weight and the pressure into that lead side nice and early. So this third point, before we move on to what happens through impact, is all to do with building the pressure under that lead foot, and it's all to do with really maintaining or creating the right body angles. If we take a setup, I'm tilted over the golf ball. I've got some forward bend, there's some angle in my body. When we finish the golf swing, we don't have those angles, we are extended. That extension is a really good source of power. We want to use that to create power. What so many golfers will do is they will use that extension of the body far too soon. They often extend as they start down. Now that's a power source that's just been lost. It's been used too early, so we can't use it through impact, and therefore when we can't use it through impact, we start to then use the hands, the arms, and we get very, very flippy. You may well know it as early extension. It's such a common fault, and you may well have videoed your golf swing and seen that. What the best players do, and this might be subtle, you may need to sort of slow a golf swing down to see it, but they will actually take the angles that they've got at address, and in transition, as they start the downswing, whilst they're making the movements they've already covered, they will also very often increase the angles. Now I'm potentially making that a little bit more extreme to demonstrate this, but what that does is it puts pressure through the lead side, it increases the angles, which means that when I want to use that extension is where I need it, which is through the golf ball. So we have to save that power source, we have to almost increase it to give ourselves more chance of using it through the golf ball. So this final point is really just to add in points number 1 and point number 2, but feel as if we're making a movement in this direction. So yes, it's forward, but it's also down. So what happens is we start the downswing before the club finishes the backswing. We feel like we hold our hip rotation as we shift. And then this final point is we want to feel like all those movements are forward and down. And you can hopefully see in that little exercise how what I feel is called squashing something under my lead foot. Imagine there is something under my lead foot and I'm really trying to squash it. So I'm trying to feel like I push down. And if I can just simply have that idea of pushing down, I'm never going to be doing this because that's pushing up and away. We want that, but we want it through impact, not as you start down. So the final point is really just to have some swings where we're trying to add all of those elements together. So hopefully you should be able to see all of the things that we've spoken about happening in this golf swing. Put it all together and you should have a start to the downswing which looks like the great players. And that's just a 7-iron, but that's perfect. Flight was good, timing felt great, exactly how I'd want it. So we said there was a final point, which is something you might want to do through impact. And really this is just to tie it all together really, because if you have made this fantastic start to your downswing, you have to transition that through. And all I really want you to think about is belt buckle. And you're going to get your belt buckle to point at the target, which it obviously doesn't at this stage here, and rise. So from here, that belt buckle rises and points at the target. What that's going to do is it's going to take all of these really good movements that you've added in and help you transition that through to a follow-through position. So this final point is really important because it's no good starting the downswing correctly if you can't take it through to the finish. So all of those things together should end up with a golf swing something like this.